Question, how do you and your party want to reflect your policies on the world stage in situations like Darfur and the Congo? So maybe we'll start with Marie and then Adriana and Andrew.
Well, I'll be brief on this one. I mean, our party at this point wouldn't have the breadth to be addressing an issue like this at this time, but from compassion, ethical standpoints, everything that amounts to oppression of other people amounts to war. Clearly, there's a lot of unrest. There's a lot of unrest in the world. We need to help each individual the best way that we can as individuals first, and everything from there goes out to there. And I have to keep returning it to the type of politicians that have been allowed to be elected for such a long time, and now we have monumental issues that are compounded on top of each other, and then people get voted out of power, and new things, and we get new people with their new, and frankly, ego, greed, opportunities, power, that kind of thing, instead of just coming from a core good value. So we're talking about countries that have different, they certainly have less freedoms as people, and their governments are not, behaving ethically as well, and we can be helpful where we need to be, but at the end of the day, when it comes to this election, any election from a city, a provincial, a federal, once you start electing people who care on a grand level, hopefully we have enough people across Canada who are representing Canadians who can give the proper care to people all over the world as well.
What Canada needs to do is take a second look at at how it addresses crises around the world. We know that we have an unfortunate tendency to go and help where there's benefit to be gained. Darfur is a very good example, and Congo is another example, where unfortunately there's no monetary value in helping them. We don't get anything out of it. When Egypt and Libya and places like that are under attack, but we're really quick to jump up and fly in there with planes. We need to make a decision. If we are going to uphold the responsibility to protect, we have to uphold the responsibility to protect. We invented that idea. We brought that to the UN. We need to make sure it's true, that wherever there is suffering, we go in and we take care of it. And I have my own, this isn't a liberal policy, this is my own policy, so I'm not getting in trouble for this one. But I believe we need to create something called the Canadian Crisis Corps, which takes, we know that we have NGOs and humanitarian aid workers who go into hot zones, and I've met with a lot of them, I've met with the military who deals with these people, and they say they're not very good when bullets are flying around. Under pressure, they don't know how to use the massive equipment to help deal with a refugee camp. And the military, we know, is also not very good at dealing with people. So we need to combine the two and have a military-trained humanitarian aid organization. So they go in, there's discipline, there's a chain of command, they never touch a gun. They're there to help people, but they have to keep their heads about them because they have that military training. And that's my vision for how Canada could act in Darfur immediately, and in the Congo, and in other places like that. But we really, going back to the original point, we need to just stick to what our principles were, which is where there are people under duress, we have the responsibility to protect them, and we don't get to pick and choose what benefits us when we go in and do that. Thanks.
Darfur is a very, very messy situation, and I would not want to go in there right now. I think that Canada has a long-standing peacekeeping role, which most Canadians support. That is there's a very big difference between peacekeeping and peacemaking. Peacemaking is what Harper is trying to do in Afghanistan, and I think it's a big mistake. We need to work through UN and international agencies to put pressure on the actors in Darfur. Now, we are not doing enough in Darfur, for sure, but I don't think that the way to go in there to handle it is to go in there with guns. We need to have people talking and to have them create a peace that we can then monitor. I do also think that Canadians need to have a dialogue about what the role of our military is going forward, because we seem to be at a bit of a crossroads, and I'm sure where we're going. Thank you.
question is from Greg. It's a substantial question, and we'll start with you. The Canadian economy is highly dependent on fossil fuel production and consumption. How would you, or your party, address climate change while maintaining prosperity and social equity?
What we have right now is an opportunity to embrace a new economy. We're going to get left behind if we don't start developing and being the world leader in green technology. It's going to happen, and we can either be the owners and the sellers of it to the rest of the world, or we're going to end up being the buyers of it. And that's just the way it's going to be. I had a hand in writing the language for the Green Energy Act when I was working for the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure. And that, people would think that was an act to support the environment. Well, it was, but really, that was an act to create green technology and jobs in Ontario. The environmental result was just a good benefit, but we wanted to make sure that we were creating new manufacturing and businesses that were green in this country and in this province. And that's something that I would push for. I would take the Green Energy Act further. I would see it to its conclusion, and I would make sure what it was intended to do was what it ended up doing on a national scale. And there you have a problem there, because there are some provinces that don't require any coal, don't require any nuclear, don't require any fossil fuels it's all, Quebec and Newfoundland and Manitoba all have great waterfalls that are pumping electricity for them. So, it's not, you have to find a national solution, and not every province is the same. So it's a tricky situation. Ontario is in a difficult situation itself with the large population, and the hardest way of getting and harnessing those already existing hydroelectric dams. So we need to really work from British Columbia all the way to Halifax and make sure that every province is on the same page with the same goals in mind, and working together east to west. We are one country. And I would see, instead of Ontario trying to come up with its own solution, why don't we just plug into Quebec? Why don't we just plug into Manitoba? We can get off coal faster than we even plan to, and we can start reducing our dependency on fossil fuels.
I'm going back a little bit to what I had said before, of course, about supporting alternative energy. I don't have all of the facts in front of me with this government that's been abusing almost everything and putting resources in the wrong place and transferring to the right things. But going back to the number one climate change consumption of fossil fuels or any energy system right now, which is the raising, harvesting, agricultural upkeep, feeding, slaughter, transport of other animals so people can eat them, is still the number one cause of climate change. And I personally live a vegetarian lifestyle. It's not about having everybody else be that, but there's nobody in this room that's a carnivore. Everybody eats vegetables as well, because we're not carnivores by nature. But the gross overconsumption of meat, the demand being actually generated by the food industry. For example, in Winnipeg, they're building or planning to or trying to actually get a hog operation that would slaughter 400 pigs a minute. And there is no reason why anybody should believe that the human animal needs to consume that many. Like where does that even go? What does that turn into? It turns into bases in soups, and it goes into unhealthy, stuffed spring rolls that go in freezers that get sold for $3 a pack. There's no quality, there's no care. We're so far removed from the care of any other beings. If you want to choose to eat meat, that's fine, but at least be connected to it. So we're talking about a huge overconsumption of our energy resources that are being diverted to something. So right off the top, to look at that issue head on, clearly we would do it. We'd love to see others do it, and just talk about healthy eating, respect for other beings, and sort of only taking what we need in all areas would be a pretty big start for us.
We clearly have to start with the easiest things first, and that means reducing our consumption. So a lot of home energy retrofits would go a very long way. There are standards developed in Europe where they're building houses that are entirely off fossil fuels. There is no reason why our national building code couldn't be as strong. And they're adopting that in Europe in this decade. We also need very high standards in vehicle and appliance efficiency. We probably could get off fossil fuels in cars this decade. Again, we also then need to invest in green energy and rebuild the national grid. That is a huge project, to rebuild the national grid for to accommodate renewable power. I do want to point out that the Harper government commissioned a study on what it would take to achieve its emissions reductions target, and its emissions reductions target is absurdly low. It is right now it's actually 2% above our 1990 levels, even though Prime Minister Harper has signed the agreement, our government has signed the agreement, internationally accepted, that developed countries should be targeting between 25 and 40% below 1990 levels. But at the time this was commissioned, the Harper government target was in fact 2% below. And what the study from the Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy suggested was that this would require at least a $100 per ton cost by the end of this decade to achieve that, and probably $150 per ton. Now, the Green Party is the only party that is really addressing this seriously. We're starting with a $50 per ton cost. That is a $34 billion change in the way the economy is run. That's huge. It represents about 1/6 of the federal budget. It is irresponsible for any party not to address that. And I gotta say that the NDP does address it at a lower level, and they use all of that money for green initiatives. The Liberal Party has said nothing, except that they will introduce it sometime, and it's not in their budget. Again, I think that's irresponsible. What we will do with that money is to redistribute it so that people can offset the increase in costs from their carbon emissions with tremendous income tax rebates, particularly for low-income folks, a lot of carbon tax rebates and employment taxes so that we can spur job creation. We also have in our budget a lot of investment on those green initiatives and rebuilding infrastructure so that we have national rail and municipal super funds on mass transit, cycling, pedestrian, and all that kind of stuff so that we can rebuild our society. Thank you.
Next question comes from Patricia, and maybe we'll start with Adriana. What will you do to restore parliamentary democracy?
This is something I'm increasingly concerned about. We have a society that is we have a democracy that's increasingly being chipped away at. Not only do the people in Parliament not resemble the vote at all, we're getting increasingly dislocated from that. The Green Party is an example where 1 million votes translated to no seats in Parliament. But there's regional differences all over the place. The Liberals have fairly strong support in the West, and that translates to no seats. The Conservatives have fairly strong support in cities in Montreal and Toronto, no seats. So that's one thing that we really need is a proportional system of government. But in addition to that, there's real problems with the concentration of power and even the whole party system, which eliminates the possibility of most independents ever running or ever succeeding. And the concentration of power in the Prime Minister's office, so that right now we have hundreds of civil servants being paid for by the public purse only to support the Prime Minister. And I'm very disturbed about the fact that the Liberal government is saying that, well, you can choose between the Liberals and the Conservatives, and either way you're going to get somebody who is going to say, now it's my turn to have all of these people supporting me and my priorities, and I'm not going to give it up. We need people in Parliament who will challenge the system and restore democracy so that what people want is really reflected in our government. Thanks.